So I guess we can do a little bit of a pre-show. So we missed an episode. It's funny because we double recorded assuming this would happen, and then we missed an episode anyways.
Yeah.
But I was busy telling my wife to make a clone of us, and she did all the work. Yeah. I just lost sleep over it. And we have a beautiful baby girl named Nice after the wonderful coastal city of in France. So that's why we missed an episode. But I am back. However, if you hear like the itty bittiest of wailing in the background, that is the reason. Yeah. But do not be concerned. You now live my life of just having an ever present wailing in the background.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's been wonderful so far. She is very cute. Even though babies are not cute, like the wiring switched in my brain, I guess, and I now find her cute. So that's a benefit for the parents.
That's good.
It helps keep the baby around. And I plan on keeping her.
Awesome. That's great.
Of my available options. No return policy.
I mean, I guess in theory there is. You could take it to like a fire station or whatever, but
I'm not sure you can do that anymore.
I just read some
policy.
I swear I just read something that you can still do that.
Oh,
I don't know.
I'm getting things mixed up. Sorry, I'm severely deprived of sleep. The thing with the fire station is you can't at the hospital ask them how to like buckle a kid into a car seat, but you used to be able to go to the fire station and have them help you buckle a kid into a car seat for your first time because you don't know what you're doing, right? But now it turns out the fire stations turn you back because there's so many car seats, and they're just like, here's a YouTube video, like use this.
QR code. There you go.
Yeah. So that's the modern solution to that problem.
Right on.
Oh no, what did I do? Okay. All is well. But yeah, that's all I have to report there. Shall
Very
we
exciting.
get this show started?
Let's do it.
Hold on. I need to figure out how a mouse works. For
all right,
whatever reason. No, I can't. I swear. I'm trying to click in this damn document. It doesn't work. Oh, it works in the other window. Oh, wonderful. If you have multiple windows open in Notes, the external window allows you to click to place the cursor. The other one just lets you select. That explains so many things. I'm trying to get rid of notifications. Don't you hate how notifications show up on like the left side? It drives me nuts.
Of what?
Of the screen. It like takes up all of your right side. Oh my. It takes up the entire right side of your screen, and it just like plasters stuff that you can't click through because it's like, here's a notification.
Oh, like a macOS notification?
Yeah. Like your system needs an update. Here's a notification. You have 17,000 reminders. Here's 3 notifications for those for whatever reason.
Yes.
And then they're just like permanently there, and you can swipe them away, but before you know it, they're back, and then they're like hiding stuff that you could be clicking on. Like, I don't know, I guess I'm old, but Macintosh hard drive is like in that corner, and you can never access it because of damn notifications.
That's true.
So that is I am still clicking in the wrong thing. Okay. That's the
There's not a way to like change where you get the notifications anymore, is there?
There never was. It was part of what's it called?
Prowl.
Oh man. Yeah, Growl. Let you choose.
Growl. Sorry. Yes.
What did you say?
Prowl.
Oh, Prowl.
I swear there was one called I don't know. Yeah. That's old school though.
That's where it came from, right? That's the whole reason why they're in the top right corner, is because that's what the defaults were. Hello and welcome once again to episode 131 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators helping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri, and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So, as mentioned in the pre-show, it's been a while, and therefore there have been quite a few new additions to the Swift Evolution both, I guess, blog, but the general proposals thing. And I have since learned there's a part of the forums that just now pins these new reviews, so that way they're easy to find which ones are active and which ones are not. So that's really cool. But the first one is freestanding declaration macros. And I am going to hop right over to the example section of this because I think that kind of sells it the best. But basically, this allows you to put macros basically anywhere. It's not like wrapping anything. It's not like acting as a function. It's just like generate code. And that's what the macro can do. And namely, you can go ahead and use them to replace things like warning and error. So this would have been like # warning, # error. And that would be a way of making an artificial warning or error in your code, but a macro can do the same thing because it can go ahead and emit like diagnostics to your editor when the macro gets evaluated. And since the macros are type safe, this gets evaluated right away as you're typing it. So that's one of the things this proposal is immediately doing right off the bat is replacing those. But you can also use it for code generation. So if you've ever looked at the Swift standard library, you would have immediately noticed the integers like int 8, int 16, int 32, int 64 don't actually exist. There's an int file, and then they use a tool called GYB, which will go ahead and generate variants for 8, 16, 32, and 64-bit because they're all essentially the same code-wise. Right. But the Swift language does not have the facility to actually go ahead and do that. So now it kind of does, or once this proposal goes in, it will, where you can go ahead and give it essentially a very big string of code, and you can go ahead and specify something you want to like generate that same piece of code 4 times and specify 4 integers. And those integers will be used as integers, not just as strings, as integers to, in a type safe way, replace all instances that have been marked as such. So that is really, really cool. And that's not the only example they gave. The last example is, hey, sometimes you're making a JSON model or a model based off of a JSON. And wouldn't it be really cool just to give a sample JSON and have it figure the rest out? And that's what they kind of do right here. They go ahead and use a pound JSON model macro, and that macro will go ahead and just take sample JSON and it will figure the rest out, which is amazing. And that is kind of what these freestanding declaration macros can do. So needless to say, this is really making them more useful based on like where everything is, and I fully expect this to be like one of the key things they're showing off during WWDC this year, because it really expands what the language can do, because now it's no longer limited to what the language can do, right? It's limited to whatever you want to do, and then macros can take you the rest of the way there.
That's super cool. To be honest, like this, a lot of this went over my head, but as soon as I saw the JSON example, I was like, oh, okay, that's very cool. Like the GYB stuff is cool for it. Like it talks about, I think it's still using GYB, but it says that you could use the macro to make sort of this template, and then it eliminates the need for a separate build phase, which apparently is what it does now to generate all of those those integer structs. So that's cool. But then, yeah, as soon as I got to like, oh, I could give it some JSON as a string and have it spit out, nested data models with Codable. That's super cool, and I'm sure people will come up with novel and very useful other ways to use these macros. So I guess in a nutshell, it's really just letting you, like you said, use macros anywhere as opposed to it was somewhat limited before.
The next proposal, it has a very long name: allow generic types to abstract over packs. And you might remember packs as something we mentioned in an episode like 3 or 4 weeks ago, where these are a new type of generic that allows you to more succinctly specify like the types that can go into a function, for instance, and those types can all be different, but they all conform to the same protocol. But you want to know what those types are at compile time, so that way you can make certain type safe decisions based off of that. And this kind of cleans that up further, and allows you to go ahead and make other like things that are currently in the standard library that can't currently like support variadic generics, support variadic generics. And the example they give is like zip, for instance. Zip will take two different sequences and construct a new sequence with pairs, essentially zipping them together. And this will allow you to do that with an arbitrary number of sequences of different types, whereas previously you're kind of limited to two. And this is very cool because it allows you to say, hey, I have 4 sequences. One is an int, one is an array of ints, one is an array of strings, one is an array of enums, and one is an array of dictionaries, for instance. And it will go ahead and zip all those together into tuples of ints, strings, enums, and dictionaries for every entry. And that's something that was not possible up until now. We've only ever had zips with 2 sequences because you can specify those directly, but you couldn't specify n sequences, and they didn't bother. Unlike with tuples, unlike with SwiftUI views, they just kind of stopped at 2, whereas those they stopped at 10 or 6. Now it's the sky's the limit. I imagine the compiler will get mad at you if you specify too many, but it's no longer a limitation of how much code someone wrote to support those things, which is very, very cool.
So yeah, that was my follow-up question. It sounds like you answered it. So this would allow, if it was rewritten, it would like allow the SwiftUI DSL to allow more than 10 objects in a single sort of I guess you'd call it a group without there needing a group.
Yeah, so this specific proposal does not touch that. That was the previous ones. This proposal is mostly for like, well, we got most of these things. This one was left, so let's go ahead and tackle this one.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of what they're doing. And then they do mention in future directions, there's going to be another proposal for variadic generic enums, and then another one for variadic generic classes. So they're just taking these one at a time to kind of knock them out. But once these are all in, it's essentially the sky's the limit. The only gripe I have is this adds a whole bunch more complicated syntax to the language, which most people don't ever need to use, which is fine. But like there's a whole bunch of new keywords like repeat, each,
right?
And you just have to know how to use them. And the only way to really know how to use them in this case is like through experience. Once you do need to like make use of this kind of thing once. But if you only need to ever make use of it once, you never really learn how to like make use of it more than once. So you kind of just like do it that one time, probably wrong, don't even realize it. And it's only until you do it like 3 or 4 more times that you really get used to that process. So that is like the only downside to this kind of stuff being added to the Swift language. I've seen a whole bunch of other people complain, hey, this makes the language more complex, and therefore we are ever farther from getting like stable debugging into the language, which is fair, right? It's kind of a nightmare to do any amount of complex debugging with Swift, especially now that async await has been added, especially now that these generic features are probably not going to be supported out of the gate 100% of the time. So that's where this kind of stuff kind of falls flat. But it does have its its use, and they do represent some dangling features that just needed to get in, right? It was just a matter of time before they did.
Yeah.
The last proposal, and this one is very simple, conform never to codable. Never does not conform to codable, and that means that if you have generic types and never is passed in, that no longer works. This is a very simple proposal to say, like, hey, let's conform never to codable, and let's be explicit with regard to like what it will do in various situations. So, for instance, if you encode a never, it's just not going to do anything. And if you decode never, then it's probably not something that someone expected. So let's throw an error. But yeah, that's what it amounts to. It's just purely ease of use kind of addition. Which, having written some generic stuff with Codable in the past, I welcome, because I think I conform never to Codable.
Yeah, probably
in the stupidest way possible.
So that's cool. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit later about more stuff about Codable, but this is a cool sort of addition to that. I've never had to use never with Codable, but I can see if you're writing some generic code, that would potentially get in the way. So,
in other news, going back to our saga that we started a few weeks ago,
yeah,
and have been updating since. Ford is very happy that GM is being stupid, and they are embracing with open arms the fact that CarPlay is a thing, and basically admitted, like, hey, we kind of lost that war, and we are happy to let people enjoy their phones in their car because that's what they care about, and that is wonderful.
Yeah, it was a 3-minute interview with someone at Ford. I don't know who it was, but yeah, he was
the CEO.
Oh, was it the CEO? Okay, yeah. Whatever. But it was cool for him to say, like, yeah, we're gonna focus on safety features that are sort of around and adjacent to CarPlay and Android Auto, but we're going to let, Android or Google and Apple basically take care of that experience because that's what people want. So that was cool. Just, as like I guess, gut check for like the industry to be like, yes, not everyone is going to do their own thing. And that's good because like we've said, all I really care about in a new car is like, is it electric and is it going to have CarPlay? So, yeah, and I think a lot of people feel the same way as well.
Yeah, and I can definitely see car manufacturers very soon not bothering to build the rest of the infotainment system out, right?
Yeah.
They can essentially assume that anyone who's going to be driving the vehicle has a smartphone, and therefore has everything that's necessary to go ahead and run basic things like radio and all that. And if that's the case, like, why put any effort at all into doing it in the car's system if it's never essentially going to be used, because you are not going to have put the time into making it decent, right? Yeah. So I can definitely see that coming very soon if it didn't happen already.
Yeah. I don't know if, like, maybe you do. I don't know if what the sort of terms are that, for Apple to put CarPlay in a car, if there's some sort of cut that they get from each sale of a car that, or whatever. But again, like I said,
I don't think there's any.
No?
No, I think they basically allow anyone to license CarPlay. I don't know if there's like a $99 per year kind of developer thing that they force the auto manufacturers
all of Ford.
Yeah, all of Ford. It's like, hey, you got to pay us the yearly developer membership. But yeah, I think Apple's playing on the other side of the street where they want as many manufacturers to have this as possible, because then that allows them to do more with it, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, okay. I was going to say, even if there was some sort of like very small percentage cut, like that would be the thing that gets me to buy the car. So from the perspective, if I was Ford, I'd be like, yeah, I'd take that loss of, some percentage of the cost, because that is ultimately what would get people to buy the car in the first place. So
Yeah, definitely. In other news, Twitter is threatening to reassign handles in its infinite wisdom, and this all started because NPR decided NPR got labeled as like a government a government account or something, even though it's like entirely public funded, like via donations. Even it's called National Public Radio, so I get the confusion. But it turns out they don't take any taxpayer money, and they are entirely funded by donations by listeners. And therefore they took offense to being labeled as a government organization. And decided to say, sorry, Twitter, like this does not represent who we are, and we're not gonna stand by it. And then Elon freaking Musk is now threatening that if NPR is not going to use their handle, then they're going to let someone else use their handle, because that represents a well-functioning social media network, to have anyone be able to claim like popular handles.
Yeah, like who's chomping at the bit to get at NPR or whatever it is? Like, who freaking cares, dude?
Someone who wants to represent NPR that shouldn't be representing NPR.
Yeah, okay, yes, that was my next thought. Is like, okay, yeah, it's so dumb. So he says, our policies to recycle handles that are definitely dormant. The same policy applies to all accounts, no special treatment for NPR, which sounds like he's just like butthurt at NPR or whatever for daring to not be active on the town square of the internet, obviously.
I think this is the abandoned town square, so little by little.
Yeah, it's so dumb though. So, any account that has not been on or has not been logged on for 30 days and that prolonged inactivity can result into being permanently removed. It's just like, freaking why, dude? I don't know. I think it's super dumb. I haven't been active. I mean, I've logged on to Twitter a couple times to check things and view tweets that people have sent, but I haven't tweeted anything in 30 minutes or in 30 minutes, 30 days. Was my account going to have the same thing happen? Not that I care. It was just like, are they actually going to enforce it for someone like me, or are they only going to really enforce it for NPR? Someone big like that.
Well, neither of us are noteworthy, so they're going to leave our accounts just fine, right?
but he said the same policy applies to all accounts, Dimitri. Don't you believe it?
Definitely. Even Elon Musk, that's why he's tweeting at 3 a.m., right? He needs to keep his account, otherwise he might take it away from himself. But this seems like the most tone-deaf thing that he can do, mostly from the point of view that most of the influential tech sphere kind of left Twitter, I would say, for the most part. And I'm not like grouping us as part of the influential part of that.
Yeah, no.
We're not. But the folks that actually are influential, they kind of left Twitter.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones who made Twitter popular to begin with. And Mastodon became the new home for that kind of stuff. And the rest of the people, they're kind of okay with Twitter because they don't know all this drama. They don't care about all this drama. And everything is fine. However, once he starts making a drama out of it, then people are going to start to notice. And as soon as NPR says, hey, we're going on this cool thing called Mastodon or co-host or whatever the flavor of the day is, then a lot of listeners to NPR, which turns out a lot more than we have, are going to consider another thing. And little by little, you're eroding your platform. Maybe that's what he wants to do. I don't know. I do not run that company, but that it just seems so short-sighted, to say the least. Maybe he's like waiting to declare bankruptcy and collect $200. I don't know what the end goal is here. Like rich people do stupid things with money all the time. But yeah, I don't get it.
Me neither. It's the dumpster fire just keeps rolling down a hill. It's still on fire, and it, I think, is an infinite Sisyphean hill. It's just gonna keep rolling until it doesn't.
In terms of the security of all this, you can't really do anything about Twitter, but it turns out Apple has been doing some pretty nifty things with macOS and iOS updates, including a very new thing that most of us have never seen. Though if you were on the betas, you probably saw it once or twice because they're testing it. But this is, for all intents and purposes, the first time we've seen something called a rapid security response. So this was a special update. It turns out it was very small and it applied instantly. Yeah. Like, I hardly noticed that I had spent time installing anything. I didn't know if I did install anything. It just happened. And as a result of this, the version number has a little A next to it.
Yeah, kind of cool. It's meant just as a sort of a, I guess what you could call a hotfix for some security issue. Part of it is that it seems like Apple isn't really saying what it fixes, which kind of makes sense. If it's like some zero-day exploit or whatever, they're not going to, straight up just say, hey,
draw attention to it.
Yeah, but it's cool that there is sort of this method by which they can more rapidly get updates out without, creating this huge entire iOS or macOS update. There's kind of some discussion. We've got a couple articles from the Eclectic Light Co. that are talking about, some people were saying, hey, there's poor USB 3 external disk performance. There's these errors and issues with these RSRs because I assume just by nature of what they are, of trying to rapidly get them out, there's probably less testing. So that kind of made people think, whatever, there's some issue. The cool part about these are, at least on macOS, I don't know about iOS, but they can be very easily uninstalled or unapplied. So I guess you could very easily see, like, is this actually the issue, or is, something else wrong and you just haven't noticed it? There's sort of this bias of just saying, like, oh, I've applied an update and something stopped working. But this article is actually really cool. It goes into how, since Big Sur, they've been hashing all of the contents of the updates to make sure that, even a bit isn't wrong. It makes sure that, the update is what Apple wants it to be. So I don't know, from my perspective, from what I read here, from, 30 minutes ago or whatever, it seems like it's, unless there is actually a bug in the update, it seems like it's pretty, even with these RSRs, it seems like it's what you are actually getting, or the update is what Apple wants you to get, if that makes sense. There could, I suppose, be a bug in that, but it's like not, the update isn't going to be corrupted in any way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, like, you can see which ones you have installed just by going to settings, general, about, and then tap the version, and it's right there. It says remove if you want to remove it. So it's very easy to decide or to debug if, like, this thing that probably was rushed out, right? It's not something that they spend a lot of time validating. It was better to get it out fast than to not have it at all. And as a result, they're kind of training everyone to say, like, hey, these rapid security response things, like, when you see them, install them. Don't wait 2 weeks. It's not going to take more than a few, not even a minute, in most cases, between it actually being ready to install and you having a booted phone or a computer. Like that, it basically downloads to your file system, and then because it uses these new things called cryptexes, that gets us applied to the system file system. When you boot up, basically, as if it were like a read-only piece of data, and that is verified at boot time that it is exactly what it needs to be. And this means that everyone is kind of running the same version of the operating system, and not the version per se, but the same exact snapshot of the operating system.
Right.
So that severely limits how many issues people can have down to individual settings rather than an incomplete install, which up until like very recently used to be the case on your computer, right? You can go ahead and need to reinstall the OS because it turns out something got a little iffy when it was doing that install that first time. Nowadays, the OS, that's just a snapshot that Apple gives you. It's not something you install, it's something you run. And if that doesn't equal the exact hash and the exact signature that Apple signed, it's not going to run. So that gives a lot of peace of mind to running the OS. Of course, it's a lot less convenient to mess around with your OS and like learn about how it works, but modern operating systems are kind of so complex, you're not really going to gain anything from that. Yeah. It's almost more fun to run an older OS in an emulator and really have at it to see like what is going on and how you can break things just by moving a single file. Which ask me how I know. So that
32.
Drag my computer to the recycle bin. Not something you can actually. Funny note on that point. Lynn's laptop, which is right there, it connects via Wi-Fi and it connects via Ethernet. And for whatever reason, when it connects via Ethernet, sometimes there's like a network loopback thing, and it will decide to put my computer, Lynn's MacBook Pro, on the desktop. For whatever reason, like it thinks that it's a connected network device, I think.
Oh, weird.
Even though that checkbox is not checked in Finder Preferences. So this just shows up temporarily along with the infamous parentheses 2, because Bonjour got very confused. And it just shows up on the desktop, and now we're like, do I just drag this to the trash to get rid of it? And
am I gonna break the whole thing?
It immediately reminded me of that gif of like the old person dragging my computer to the recycle bin and then it zooming out showing them and then the computer just going poof.
Yeah, there you go.
So
that's awesome.
It's a good classic one. But yeah, I don't know exactly what was going on there, but this whole system that Apple has put together is way more secure. It makes things way more consistent, right? And it basically guarantees that Spencer is running the same exact operating system down to the bit that I'm running, that you are running, as long as we're all on the same version. But if we're on different versions, then as like we all went the same progression, basically. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah. What's also cool is the Foundation package preview is now available. So we have the ability to run this in our own apps, it sounds like. Is that right? Could we replace
I'm not
Foundation?
Sure. I'm not sure if Foundation itself, like this package, can be included in an app. I think it requires like Swift 5.9. So that's not something that most people have available to them. But it does give you instructions for how to get Swift 5.9 if you'd want to run it early. And I imagine once Swift 5.9 becomes available, it will be something that you can go ahead and use for your own apps, right? If you choose to use this version of Foundation versus the bundled one on the operating system you're running on. The major benefit is once this is part of the proper toolchain is Xcode can dynamically choose, hey, you want this version of Array. This one's better than the dynamically linked one. That was not the explicit goal of this, but I imagine that will be possible, just because you will be referencing that namespace versus the pre-included version of Foundation. So I think that is one side effect of this. But the main use case was to have Foundation be rewritten in Swift rather than be the C the C library that
Sure.
has shipped with macOS and iOS for the past decade, basically, with a Swift overlay on top of that.
So we've got there's kind of a lot to talk about, but on that note, so I suppose the goal is to actually just completely rewrite Foundation as Swift. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then from there, I'm sure they're going to make it compatible with Objective C. Right?
Not necessarily, right?
Oh, okay.
Objective-C has the C version of Foundation that it can
Okay.
continue to use.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. So
Just like SwiftUI is not compatible with Objective-C.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
But it could be included in in the next version of macOS and iOS. We might see this version of Foundation to be available.
So, okay, so with that, like you said, it's sort of we'll be able to dynamically choose. So this is like it's not complete by any means. So if you were to include this, it could say like some things that do exist are data and date and JSON encoder. So it could say, oh, you've got that, and you obviously you just say like whatever Swift Foundation or whatever the package is, or the module is called .json encoder and use that. But then in the same app, Objective-C could just be using normal Foundation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe that's the case.
Okay.
Like if you link Foundation, you're gonna use the built-in Foundation.
Sure.
If you link Foundation Essentials, I think is the name of the target. Or no, if you link Foundation Preview, you're gonna get this version, right?
Okay.
And then if you use date in a file that only links Foundation Previews, then you're using the new version. If you include both Foundation and Foundation Preview and you try to use date, it's probably going to get mad at you and say, hey, you need to say foundation.date or foundation preview.date. So that's
cool.
that's the difference between those. Now, being rewritten in Swift, people might wonder, like, why? Like, C is a perfectly good language. Why are we doing this in Swift? Well, it turns out Swift is a better language for a lot of modern things than C, namely with its fantastical support of objects and booleans and all sorts of other things, namely compile time optimization. And that means that basic things like JSON decoding can be 5 times faster, which is like a major improvement just by rewriting it in Swift. So I'm sure it has been optimized in that process. Like the first version was not faster, but then because it's a modern language, immediate like obvious signs kind of showed themselves to the developers that kind of put this initial package together. Where they was like, I can improve this, I can improve this, I can improve this with some better data practices. And that's kind of what brought the most improvements. So it turns out using a modern language has lots of benefits. And I think overall it's just going to be more secure, less prone to memory issues, and over time, less zero-day attacks, right? If we can move away from Objective-C and more towards Swift in general.
Yeah, and not to mention it's open source, so not to say that there aren't smart people at Apple working on Foundation, but you've definitely widened the area of expertise to people that don't necessarily work at Apple, but they, can optimize the crap out of, URL or whatever, some things that it talks about that they're going to be working on later that don't have implementations yet. So,
and do you know what my favorite
implementations?
My favorite contributions so far that I've peaked are people fixing the documentation.
Dude, that's perfect.
Apple's obviously not going to do it, but if Apple lets all of us do it, then like we'll be happy campers, right?
Yeah, dude, write some doc.c or whatever. That's awesome.
So that is a very welcome thing. If you want to go ahead and contribute to a project where they're like, hey, don't like write a lot of new code because we're kind of shepherding this forward. But if you spot any bugs, like please let us know, yada yada. If you spot missing documentation and add missing documentation and it turns out to be correct, that will most definitely be accepted. Because there is never enough good documentation out there. Even if you're improving poorly written documentation to be more clear, that is a direct benefit to everyone using this.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's an easy way if you want to find yourself into an open source project, is to kind of help out with that.
Yeah. On that note, I maybe I'll talk about it next week for a mini review corner or something. But I was working on something for my sister's wedding, and it involved using Python, and I'm not versed in Python, but the project was open source, and the instructions weren't like 100% clear on something. And so I had the forethought to go into the PRs and see if anyone had written better documentation. And it turns out they had written documentation exactly for what was missing and what I needed. So that saved the day for me. And I'm, using Swift, that's going to be magnitudes more useful for a magnitudes more people. So yes, definitely documentation saves the day.
Yeah, and Swift is in a very unique position where, like, it has a unique shepherd for the language, right? That is Apple. And that means there aren't 17 different ways that you can write documentation in Swift. There's a single way that you can write documentation in Swift, and it shows up in Xcode. And then if you did that, it also allows you to make these beautiful Doxy documentation sites based off of that documentation that you already wrote. There's only one way of writing tests, and that's using Xcode XCTest and XCAssert and all those wonderful functions. And there is no fragmentation really in this ecosystem because it has such strong leadership behind it. And that means that it's very consistent and very easy to know what the right thing to do is. And that's, I think, the best part that most open source projects can never really get, because there is a single company that's kind of managing all of this and making sure that things are done to a high quality standard. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Talking about things of high quality standards and documentation, StateObject got some brand new documentation that clarify how to not use it wrong. Because it turns out people have been using it wrong for a very long time. Namely, when it comes to initializing the state object from within the initializer, a lot of people miss the fact that the initializer is called every run loop cycle, like many times. And you telling the state object, hey, here's some data you should use, only works the very first time. And it will never really stick the next times after that because there's already a reference that the Swift UI system is using, and therefore it'll just kind of skip over what you're doing. So Apple has updated the documentation, and it is much clearer now. Hey, if you want this to like take effect a second time, specify an ID with a unique hash, and it will take effect a second time, because you now have a different set of data coming in, and therefore it's going to build a brand new view. There are some caveats with that, so do keep them in mind. But that is one thing you can do. Another thing that I like to do is go ahead and add an on appear, on disappear, like one of those blocks, and set the value in the on appear. Because that means that when your view comes on screen the next time around, it will go ahead and apply that value that you passed into your initializer and you probably saved somewhere. It will go ahead and apply that to the existing state object that's already there. This is kind of why I don't like using view models in Swift and Swift UI, because at the end of the day, you end up needing to write a lot of this plumbing yourself. But once you know how to do it, it's not the biggest deal. But if you can keep as much of the state as raw value type semantic state in the view, then you don't need to do this, right? You don't have an object to begin with. But if you do, this is something that you can like do to work around it. And I happily congratulate Apple on fleshing out the documentation further. This one already had a lot of documentation, and they just added another section for it that clarified things. And I fully welcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another case for, stuff being open source, right? Because I'm sure like people have figured out SwiftUI, I think, pretty well at this point. And if SwiftUI was open, or I guess its documentation was open, it would be awesome to have people contribute and be like, hey, this is how you should use it. And people have probably figured out good ways to use it. And I mean, like you said, people have used view models in all of these different sort of architectures. So maybe it wouldn't work very well. I don't know. I'm sure you get a lot of suggestions where it would get rejected, and maybe they're, I don't know. I don't know if there's a good answer to that, but you know, and I've said it before, but in the first sort of beginnings of SwiftUI, there was no documentation. It was absolutely awful to work with because no one knew how to use it. So
Apple didn't know how to use it.
Yeah, well, yes, that too.
So yeah, if only there was like a SwiftUI preview package, right? That would be really neat. But I highly doubt that's coming, because that essentially allows people to do a bit more than just use Swift on cross platforms, but to write these things called Windows apps. Oh, it's like, I don't know if you heard of that platform.
Windows.
Windows, yeah. It's not the Windows that are on your Mac. It's an operating system. It's this whole thing.
It's not an NS window. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Something that you should pay attention to, though, is you can now register domains in settings, which I was not expecting at all to be a thing. But it is a thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it out. I didn't know that, but it'd be cool to, you know, get your own. Is this for like emails?
Yeah.
Or just like, yeah, okay.
So this was a feature for iCloud, right, where you can go ahead and hook a custom domain to your email, and that's where I thought the feature ended. But apparently, you can go ahead and register that domain right in the settings app, and I think it does it through CloudFront. Is that the one?
Cloudflare?
Cloudflare is one of the clouds. It will go ahead and register through them. And like from that point forward, you're their customer. Apple just kind of facilitated the UI for that. And I'm sure they get a little kickback. But yeah, that seems cool.
How do you even just like, I don't know. I don't understand this. How do you like, if you have a domain, which we both do, how do you like, why can't I just like use your domain as an example? Like, does it like log you in and like make sure you, like, how does it verify that you own the domain, I guess?
So it gives you instructions to go ahead and set up MX records that point to Apple servers. So only you could do that. However, if Apple is registering the domain through Cloudflare for you, then Cloudflare can auto put those MX records and have that be possible.
Gotcha. Okay. That's cool, though.
Something else that's cool is Apple has finally won the case against Epic Games for realz this time, using that gamer lingo. And yeah, they were in the right to revoke their developer membership. I think that's all that it amounted to.
Yeah, pretty much. Tim Sweeney's comment on this, who's the CEO of Epic Games, says, fortunately, the court's positive decision rejecting Apple's anti-steering provisions frees iOS developers to send consumers to the web to do business with them directly there. We're working on the next step. So it sounds like Epic Games is probably not done with this whole thing, but they got something out of it, which is, you know, they can not really skirt, but that you can actually direct people to a website to if you want to use some third-party payment processor. So that's sort of, I guess, the only thing that really came out of it in like Epic Games' favor. Although sort of along with that, sorry, I'm kind of skipping ahead. If you want to go back, that's cool. Sideloading is rumored to be added to iOS 17 as a part of the EU's DMA Digital Market Act. That's coming into effect in 2024. So that's, I guess, maybe, I guess the thing with this is like people are thinking maybe this will only be available in the EU, and we've got another article about how Apple could sort of do that. And so my thought is like maybe Epic Games is going to say if it's only available in the EU, they're going to try to make it expanded to everywhere for like making sideloading available. That's I guess what I can see happening with sort of Epic Games' next steps or whatever. Yeah, interesting stuff. And all right,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
There's a few layers to it, right? There's the Apple being forced to no longer tell developers you can't have a link to your website to accept payment, right?
Yeah.
That is different than what Epic Games did. Epic Games directly put payment processing directly in the app,
Yes. Yes.
which is what got them in big trouble. And many countries have essentially told Apple you cannot tell people or tell developers they can't have a button to go to their website. Like that is not allowed. So I don't know what the official state of the review guidelines are, but they have been actively changing for several app categories who can go ahead and link to a web page. Generally, this has been like limited to reader apps or corporate apps, and not things like games. But it seems like, at least in the US, it's going to be for every app. If a developer wants to link to their website, Apple has to let them do it. I don't know when they're going to have to let people do it. That's something we're going to have to wait and see. But that is something to consider. Then there's sideloading, right? Sideloading is the ability to just put any app on your phone, which you can absolutely do today. I don't want to like tell people that you cannot sideload. You totally can sideload. It's just a bit involved. But it's something that you can do if you have an IPA, which is an iPod archive of an app, which is essentially a zip file with some metadata. But if you have one of those and you sign the app with your Apple ID, you can put it on your phone. It will expire. If you give Apple $99 a year, it will not expire for a very long time, for like many months.
1 year.
So you can totally sideload. It's just has steps involved. It needs a computer. The thinking here is that maybe in iOS 17, sideloading is going to be a lot easier, meaning you can do it directly from the device. I don't know if that's the case. This is like heavily rumored. But the fun thing is that people have discovered that Apple has a new process called Country D. The D stands for daemon. Basically a piece of software that will run automatically in the background. And this one will determine which country you are in through mystical means. And the thinking is that maybe this is how they determine whether you get sideloading or not, depending on where you are physically located. So that is something to be excited about, I guess. I don't know how else to put it. But yeah.
Yeah. Geo restriction is, an interesting idea. And obviously they're doing stuff like that with like China. But I think that's really the only exception. And everywhere else, more or less, has the same features. It notes that like Apple News and Apple Pay Cash are on, it seems like, only in the US, maybe? I don't know about Apple News, but I don't know. Anyway, there are some sort of like region-gated, region-locked features, but, I guess this is a somewhat more dynamic way of doing it, where you could just set the iPhone's region to US and you'd get access to Apple News and Apple Pay Cash, but this is a little bit more baked in. So,
yeah, and that's something that I have done before, actually. I set my region, didn't change the language, but set the region to Japan. And that allowed me to get a Suica card in the Apple Wallet. And if you don't know, but you have watched anime, a Suica card is the green card that every anime person has whenever they enter a train station, because it's so ubiquitous, at least in Tokyo. Different regions have different cards. There's a few of them. But Suica one is the big one that's part of Tokyo and the surrounding area. And that is essentially like Apple Pay from 20 years ago. It's tap to pay. The card itself holds your balance, which is crazy. But you can go to a convenience store, buy stuff. You can go down the train, tap your way in and tap your way out into Tux. You can recharge them almost anywhere. It's basically a debit account that anyone can go ahead and get. And turns out iPhones had support for this like before they had Apple Pay. Like the first version of NFC was for Japan for this card.
Oh, cool.
And all you had to do is set your region to Japan, and you can go ahead and like load it up in the wallet, or scan an existing card if you had one. Which was a fun process. You had to hold your phone to the card for a long time while it physically transferred your balance from the card. Like it's not an ID.
Crazy.
It's not an ID with a server. No, the card has your balance. It's fantastical. Like huge red sirens, but the US financial system is way worse. It's like, turns out you can empty someone's account with two numbers. One, which is publicly available. The second, you just have to wait for them to give you a check once, and then you have their account number. Great security. U.S. financial system. Anyways, long story short, like the region changing has always been easy. This seems to be something that's a lot more automatic and something you can't get around, which stinks. Especially if it's going to be used for something like sideloading, which genuinely seems to be something good, right? It will kind of force Apple to do the right thing on the App Store, because the alternative is just as possible. The downside is I think the App Store might just become a little bit deserted, because I don't know if you've ever tried to search it recently. It's a hot steaming pile of goop.
Yeah, I agree that this is a positive thing, either in making the App Store better or just allowing sideloading, whatever. That's cool. I mean, that on that Surface Duo, you can just download an emulator from the Play Store and it's sweet, playing like Nintendo DS games on two screens. It's awesome. But there's no emulators on the App Store, and I understand why from a legal standpoint. But they're on GitHub. Right, and you can sideload them now. It's just a pain. So if I wanted to put a Game Boy Advance emulator on, it's kind of a pain. It'd be nice to just, do it from sideloading it from like the settings app or whatever. Just drag, open the Files app, get an IPA. It'd be cool. I don't know. There's a lot there, but I'm interested to see where this goes come iOS 17 and come. I guess with iOS 17, if it is really actually region locked, that's going to be a big old bummer. So,
yeah, Michael Tsai has an excellent roundup article on this, and he links to Riley Tested's toot, which is titled "How Will Apple Restrict Sideloading?" I was only able to choose 4 options, alas, and it seems that people voted limited features like no iCloud, scary warning alerts, and require enabling a developer or other mode are all tied.
Sure.
And then the distant 4th place was require a computer, which is currently the case. Like, that is how it's restricted.
Yes.
You have to have a computer and an Apple ID. So we'll see what this amounts to. I don't think anyone really knows what they're talking about when they're saying in a public forum, Apple needs sideloading. What are they expecting? They are expecting you go to a website and you click download. But that is, as we have mentioned many times, a horrible idea. It's a good thing you can't download software that way on mobile devices. That is why they are safe. And that is just a ripe way to have scams, right? At the end of the day, that's the major security exploit nowadays, is just scams. They're not even exploiting anything. They're just tricking you into thinking something and then running amok with your information that you gave them because they tricked you. And the App Store doesn't fix that. It could have fixed that if Apple took it seriously, but they don't. And now we are in this situation. So thank you, Apple, for doing a bad job at your job.
Yeah. The limited features thing is an interesting idea, and what is maybe perhaps a little scary to me. That would suck a little bit. I guess it seems semi-vindictive, but also I guess I could maybe see why that's happening.
Sideloading is available today. You just don't have Access is Swift because it's all
Exactly. Yeah, you got to write it all in C. Have fun.
No, not C. It's all in HTML and JavaScript as possible today.
Sure. Yeah. But like, give me the scary warning alerts. macOS already does that. Makes you right click and hit open. Says, whatever. Okay. And also enabling a developer mode. Yeah, okay. Do that. That's fine. I just don't want the limited features, man.
Yeah, well, I definitely like things like CloudKit and stuff like that. I don't think are going to be available. Like that has always kind of been the case on like macOS. Like I am surprised they allow CloudKit on macOS non-App Store apps, right? And that was mostly because a lot of apps could not work sandbox, and therefore Apple kind of relented. But at first, it was not available if you decided to distribute outside the App Store. So, I don't trust. Like many people say, oh, we should be trusting the phone's advanced security. Like I don't trust that. There's been so many exploits of doing janky things just by running natively on device. So,
well, that's why we have the new RSRs in the first place, right? Like because it's not secure. I mean, it's pretty good, but
those will only end up disabling the Facebook app because they were doing something totally bad, and then Facebook is going to be like, "Hey, Apple's disabling our app on purpose, not because we were doing something bad, but because they hate us." So that's going to be a fun drama.
Facebook would never do bad.
This week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Not Pho. Tired of eating the same old meals time and time again? Consider Vietnamese food. You might already know pho, but there are tons of other flavors specific to Vietnamese cuisine that are sadly not well known around the world. This includes everything from sandwiches like banh mi, rice plates like com tam, and even the deliciously savory crepes known as banh xeo. That's where the app Not Pho comes in. It's a free-to-try app dedicated to teaching you more about the wonders behind Vietnamese cuisine, brought to life with colorful and interactive illustrations and animations. Learn how to make many classic Vietnamese flavors at home, but even if you don't cook, you'll know how to order like a pro the next time you visit your local Vietnamese restaurant. Recently new is version 1.2, which brought a brand new home screen to the app featuring a recipe of the week and a map of Vietnam, allowing you to start exploring recipes by region as well. Thanks again to Not Pho for sponsoring our show. Search for Not Pho, that's N-O-T space P-H-O on the App Store today to give it a try completely for free. So, Spencer, I have a code completion tip for you. And that is related to a question you asked me about. So, it's once again a heavily targeted tip. And that is all about padding in Xcode. So, you might have noticed when you add files to your Xcode project that sometimes asks you, hey, do you want to add these as groups? Do you want to add these as like individual files, a folder reference, yada yada. There's all sorts of different things you can do. If you choose folder reference, something interesting happens. It will go ahead and use an absolute path to the file that you just dragged in. Instead of copy it to your repo or your project folder and use a relative path of that file. Now, sometimes you did drag in a file that was initially outside, but then it got moved to the inside. And then all of a sudden things don't work anymore, and that's because the file is missing or it was referred to using an absolute path. And that means that it's basically looking for / Macintosh hard drive / users / Spencer / developer / project X / my super awesome file.swift. And if I try to run that, I don't have a / user / Spencer on my computer, so that's just not going to work. And that's where this kind of all falls apart if you use it incorrectly. It's meant to be used to link to, say, frameworks that are at an exact position on the file system, maybe a C library that's in /bin, /local/bin or something. But generally, most of the time, you probably want to stay away from absolute paths as much as you can and use relative paths. Now, thankfully, it's very easy to switch over. If you select your file in Xcode and then go to the right-hand side, which is hidden by the notifications that show up on macOS, see the Preshow for more, that will go ahead and give you the option to choose. Do I want an absolute path? Do I want a relative path? And if you switch them, there's a little folder icon you can click, and you can go ahead and relocate your file if it ended up in a weird place, or you cloned something and it's missing, and then you had to ask your colleague for the file and kind of you need to fix it, this is where you go. It's all on that right hand side. Once you click on the file in the file like inspector, I guess it would call. I try to find like a reference to any of this on the internet, and I had a very hard time. But I did find something from 2014, which brought back memories because that was Xcode 5. The release before Swift. So it's brief Swift.
Dang.
And it basically talks about all these things which are still relevant. Like there's one or two things in this article that no longer apply. But for the most part, the rest do completely apply.
That's crazy.
And it's a good reminder of things that are just like still in there that that work that way they do. Yeah.
Yeah. It was an interesting problem because coworker 1 was the one that made the project, or the repo project, extra project, whatever. And employee 2 or coworker 2 said, "Hey, it's not working for me. Can you check this out?" I cloned it and it worked for me. So I think it like got, like the squiggly line or the tilde for home fine. I happened to clone it to documents, so it worked fine for me. I think coworker 2 cloned it somewhere else, and so it didn't for him, and that was the issue. So it was really weird. But yeah, it was a good lesson into pathing for me and my coworker, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't know, tilde is a shorthand for your current home directory.
Home.
So
yeah.
In this case, it wouldn't have broken between Spencer and I had we put it in the same place in our home directory. But as soon as it's in a different place, like maybe coworker 1 used developer instead of documents, right?
Yep.
And Spencer just happened to use the same one, and therefore it worked. And it's like, huh?
Yeah.
So that's where this kind of usually Xcode will be like, this file is missing red. That's how you know it's not happy. And the first thing I do from experience working with people that don't know how pathing works is go check that inspector. So yeah, definitely recommend that one if you're working with an older project or one that has been handed off to you. That's usually the fix. So today I have a relatively unique mini review corner, and that is I got 5G. All the 5Gs.
5G.
5G. 5G. 5G. 5G.
Apple would be so proud of you.
Verizon too. But Verizon would actually be disappointed because this is 5G through AT&T, and this is not the bogus 5G. This is the good 5G because this is 5 gigabit internet, which is mind freaking blowing. So long story short, I have been a relatively happy subscriber of Spectrum cable over the past several years because they offered gigabit cable, which gives you 940 megabits per second, not quite 1,000 download, and then like a very sad 40 megabit per second upload, and that has worked until recently, like the past year, I would say. It has stopped working. It has become a thing that has continuously died on me. Every hour or so, it would just drop out for a few seconds and then just like not work. And I think whenever we stream this, like inevitably during the stream, I would just like get choppy and cut out. And that's because my internet just happened to die for a few seconds. 100% packet loss, and then it came back. Nothing happened. So that was not ideal, and that was like a very recent development. And I knew this was happening because when I semi-recently got like overall my networking with Ubiquity Gear, they tattle. They go ahead and have a bar chart that will tell you when the internet is down and when it comes back up. And they will go ahead and like send you a notification when the network is like down for long enough. And this has been steadily getting progressively worse. Now, meanwhile, AT&T has been, how should I put it? They've been tempting me for years now, and Spencer knows this because they did not have residential or business fiber. They had dedicated fiber available basically since I moved here. And that is very exciting. The unexciting part was the fact that it costs $1,000 a month for gigabit, and they do go higher. Like you can get 10 gigabit, but for the low price of $5,000 a month, which is the price of like my entire mortgage and then some, which is not something I can splurge on. As much as I would like to admit it, I that was never something that I was going to do. Though it got so tempting because Spectrum kept getting worse and worse and worse. Now this is made even more tempting by the fact that a year ago, AT&T went and pulled fiber literally through my backyard because that's where the utility poles are. And they pulled that fiber through, and I watched the people pull it. Little by little, it went through, and we ostensibly had fiber running.
It's just sitting there
from one from one avenue on one side of like where I live to another avenue on the other side, ostensibly to connect the two avenues, not to give us any fiber. So
right.
that's like something that's a suspicion I got, because when I eventually called and asked, and there's like, oh, it's not available yet, and then 2 months later, Spectrum is giving me a hard time. So I call and ask again. Oh, it's not available yet. 2 months later, I call again, and they said, oh, usually for residential fiber, we dig that up through the roads. We never do it on utility poles, so that is likely not for you. It is something for like connecting two avenues to arteries in the city blocks. And that made me very sad. Now, didn't prevent me from giving up. Like, I continued to check online. It's like, hey, AT&T location checker, do I have fiber? Mm-hmm. No, I don't. Okay. And I would do this habitually, like once a week, every time fiber gave me a big deal. Now, fast forward, it is about a day and a half, maybe 2 days after we come back from the hospital, having given birth to our daughter. And once again, Spectrum decides to really throw a fit. It did not really want to work that day. So I'm like, fine, I'm going to check again. It's late at night, 2 a.m. I think it was. Or it might have been early. I like immediately spammed our Slack. So there's evidence of exactly what time this was. It was 11 p.m., let's just say. Late. I went and checked, and I was so happy in my sleep-deprived state to report to my wife, AT&T fiber is available. Not only is it available, it's like for par to par. Like if I'm just looking at gigabit, ignoring upload speed, but just like the gigabit download, it is way cheaper than the Spectrum internet that I'm paying for. And since it's fiber, it would be much more reliable than good old cable internet. And not only is 1 gigabit available, there's a nice little button to see choose higher speeds, and 2 gigabit was available and 5 gigabit was available. And I happen to have a network that's at least 5 gigabit like capable, so I of course go for that one. And I tell all my friends that would appreciate this news. No one gives a shit about fiber internet other than us geeks. And yeah, I put in the order that late at night. I waffled a bit between getting like the business version or the residential version. The business version is like $400 a month. Residential is $180, so it's significantly cheaper. But with business, you can do things legally that are businessy, like have static IPs and all that. And then I did more research, like right before clicking the button, of course. That hey, it turns out AT&T allows you to just purchase public IPs. So that's I'm like, awesome. Okay, I'd like one, please. And they're like, oh no, they don't sell them one by one. They sell them in blocks of 8, where like 5 are usable, 3 are like the multicast, one's a router, and one's a mystical IP that you can't access. I think it's the actual like gateway thing that gets one. And that like you get 5 IPs from that one block. or you can get 16, or you can get 32, or you can get 64. Or it turns out when I called the next day, you can get 128. Like, AT&T is happy to sell you these very limited IPv4s.
Dang.
So I splurged and got myself a 32 block for all my server needs.
Yeah.
It was like a $40 edition for 32 IPs. I'm like, I'm happy to pay that. I pay more for single IPs through Max Stadium. So that is like a very cool thing. And yeah, so now I just needed to wait.
So your whole 5 gigabit cost is like $220 a month or something?
Yeah.
That's insane,
with
dude.
static IPs.
Oh my gosh, man. That's awesome. I mean, I'm happy with the price of my gigabit. I think it's $70 a month, but like that is not much more for 5 gigabit. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's the part that I was not really expecting, is like 5 gigabit to be readily available. But like I would have been happy with gigabit fiber. But I am ecstatic to have 5 gigabit. So backing up, put the order in, called the next day, was all excited on that support line to get my static IPs. I had a few other questions about like, hey, I'd like to not have port 25 blocked because I want to run the basement mail server that will get me in trouble when I run for presidency. That is something I'd like to do. And
run for presidency?
No, the basement email server, which I don't even have a basement, but I don't know if I can do that. It turns out like it's more complicated because spammers have ruined port 25. So I might actually need a business line for that, but I have a business, like a legal business entity, and I had confirmed later that I can get a second line to this house. So that is something I can do if I take it seriously. But until then, I don't necessarily need to take it seriously. Because I just had to wait for Tuesday, and that was the last Tuesday. So I wait patiently. I'm so excited the day of. Not more excited than my daughter's birth, to be clear, but it was like not far behind. Considering how long, how much longer I had waited for fiber internet in my life compared to a child.
That's awesome.
So fiber internet guy, he came that day, and he was very cool about like me like watching, because I had nothing better to do as Lynn and little baby niece were sleeping and getting some beauty rest because they were up all night, and so was I, but I was sleep deprived, and I got to watch the fiber dude install fiber, which was very cool for me to watch. And turns out there's like 8 terminals for the 4 houses, so I'm like, hypothetically I could get a second business line. They're like, yeah, they're over provisioned, so good to go there. Watch the guy get this very chunky and thick cable, which is designed to safeguard the fiber, and I don't think anyone could see through the camera, but I will, I guess, link to a toot that I shared that shows like some imagery of these fiber cables. But this is basically a fiber cable in the very middle with 2 Kevlar rods to kind of keep it stiff and structurally sound and safe from squirrels. Turns out squirrels love chewing this stuff because there's like a soy plasticky thing in it. So that's what's trying to keep it safe from. So that got to the house, and then into a little terminal where they splice a different cable that the installation person very graciously went along with my plan to go through all the eaves, and then like I already had something set up for the cable internet. So fiber cable, very tiny, very easy to put through all that. And then that went ahead and terminated on the inside of the house where I connected it to my Ubiquiti gear. And the guy was like, so like how are you going to use your 5G? Because to most people that are getting the 5G, they just use the Wi-Fi, and it's like they're missing out, kind of. Yeah. He was telling me, and I'm like, oh no, I have a full 25 gigabit network on the inside, so I will take full advantage of this. So yeah, that all got hooked up. Initially, I was scared because the little gateway thing that had the mandatory Wi-Fi. I spoke a little bit about this like 2-3 weeks ago about cell providers like forcing people to use the Wi-Fi that is provided. So I was like a little bit skeptical of like, can I turn Wi-Fi off on this? Turns out I could. Nice. And then how to set it up properly for the IPs and all that. And it turns out it was relatively easy. However, that first day, I guess it needed to like download updates or whatever, and it kept going offline. And I was like, oh man, my 5G is fast, but it doesn't stay online for more than 10 minutes before overheating or something. Which is I was sure like was the problem. But after that day, everything has been rock solid stable. I was able to configure the public IPs very easily. I was able to get everything hooked up. And I didn't really have anything to test it with other than like speed tests. I haven't been doing iOS development for a long time, so like it didn't even register to try to download Xcode. But then I thought to myself like several days later, I know how I can test this. I can download Xcode. So I go ahead and try that, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna download and grab a screenshot to show off and all that, and I missed it. Because it downloaded in just over 12 seconds. And I was fubbing over screen sharing. Like, how do I get a screenshot? It's happening too fast. At 400 megabytes per second. This is faster.
You got, in your screenshot, it's 478 megabytes per second.
Sorry, that's only the difference of like another gigabit Ethernet.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I did not think that Apple was capable of delivering Xcode this fast. I thought it was limited to like 80 megabytes because on Spectrum, where I do have gigabit download, it was limited to 80 megabytes, not 120, right? 120 being the theoretical max. It was limited to 80. And if you're wondering how that math works, take a gigabit, 1000, and divide by 8, and you have the gigabytes that it corresponds to, which is 120 megabytes. In this case, 5 gigabit would be 120 times 5. That would be the theoretical maximum. Turns out you can't get 5 gigabit via a single connection because of like overhead. So it's 4.7 gigabits. But I'm happy with 4.7.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And Apple was happy to deliver Xcode to me at 470 megabytes per second, which is absolutely insane. Thankfully, I have a Mac Studio that's capable of decompressing it in a sane amount of time too.
Yeah.
That's the bigger joke at that point. Is how long that takes to decompress. But yeah, overall, I am super satisfied with 5 gigabit Ethernet. 5G, it turns out, was our savior all along. I'm sorry for doubting you, 5G.
It's not the same one.
Not the same one. It's kind of crazy that I have faster home internet than what people are calling 5G, like the UC, the millimeter wave stuff that people were getting 3 gigabit to like their phone out in space. At least download. Upload was always sadder. But
that's peasant level speed now for Dimitri. He finally has the baller network complete, man.
The baller internet for the baller network. So yeah, I invite everyone to go ahead and check if AT&T Fiber is available in your area. Hands down, very happy with this. Has not dropped since, I cannot say the same for Spectrum. It has dropped since, and I know that because I have both lines connected to the Unify switch. I guess I wanted the safeguard of a guarantee. The phone call to Spectrum was very sad to cancel. They're like,
were they were they just so reluctant to cancel it?
Oh, they were very reluctant. They're like, we want to make sure you know all the facts. And I'm like, I'm sorry, lady. Like, there's no competing. It's 5 gigabit fiber. You do not offer that. Even 1 gigabit fiber was cheaper than what I'm paying. And they're like, oh, we can give you that promotional rate back. And I'm like, I appreciate that, but I don't appreciate that because you nickel and dime me for 3 years. But yeah, it turns out that was a relatively painless call. As long as you're willing to say no to everything. And I guess it feels bad. I felt a little bad because the person on the other line of that, on the other side of that call, like their job is to try to upsell me, right? But there's literally nothing they could do. They're like, oh, but you can get bundled TV cable. I'm like, I don't want that. Never again.
You could get a free phone line.
Yeah, free phone line. I'm like, I have a free phone line technically because I'm still on my parents' line, and I don't directly pay for that either. So there's nothing you could do to convince me otherwise. And I do pay my parents back for my phone line before anyone asks. But Spectrum didn't need to know that. And yeah, it just I felt bad because there was literally nothing they could grasp on.
No. So it's your magnitudes ahead at that point, like almost literally. So my favorite part in all this is at 10 a.m. Dimitri starts slacking photos of him preparing and stuff, and begins to give us a play-by-play like almost every hour of the progress up till like 3 o'clock. So it was like a hilariously like he's just like. The anticipation is he's like so close I can taste it when it gets into a box and everything. It's so funny. So the play-by-play was very welcome, and the payoff was a speed test screenshot of him getting 4,664 download and 4,393 uploads. So that's pretty insane. So
and ironically enough, thank you. Ironically enough, on that screenshot, it still shows I have Spectrum internet. Because I didn't relaunch the speed test app after like having the network switch over. It was just that's what it was. So it thinks I'm on Spectrum. So I felt a little bad. But yeah, I guess I wanted to end this on this very thin little cable has an even thinner like needle-sized piece of glass in it, and that needle-sized piece of glass doesn't really break. No matter like how much you like really bend it, you have to make a loop like this and then pull to snap that piece of glass on there. And even if it snaps, it's not going to ruin the signal significantly because it's still like right there. So there's a lot of that going on. But if you do strip this and then get that one rod of glass and then strip that is something that's like dangerous, which I didn't even think about. Like it's something that you can get in your fingers, and it's like having a cut of glass, or like if you ever broke a glass like and you have it embed in your foot, like it will stay there for your life. You know, I don't know if anyone's unfortunate enough to have felt that, but it sucks. And this has that potential, which is why I like took a picture of it and then I immediately snapped that off and put it in the trash because I don't want that laying around. The cats are going to eat it or whatever. Yeah, they already ate through one fiber cable. So yeah, that's a separate thing. But yeah, it's totally amazing that this is something that's available. I am very much looking forward to moving all my little tiny projects from a very old 2012 Mac Mini that's sitting out in Las Vegas over to my little home lab, which is
that's awesome.
I would say relatively just as reliable. I mean, the Mac Mini itself is not super reliable, so it doesn't matter what kind of infrastructure is supporting it over there. Over here, I guess I have good internet now that has battery backups on all the network switches, and the system will have a battery backup, so it's like should be good enough. Yeah. And yeah, I'm looking forward to like having fun resetting all that up and enjoying my fast internet, because like I don't know about everyone else, but when the world was getting DSL, when the world was getting cable, over in the Hollywood Hills where my parents live, we were stuck with dial-up for the longest time. Oh. I was still using dial-up till the age of 16, using good old LimeWire to illegally download anime with subtitles that was not available here. That like really changed the course of my life in no insignificant way, in terms of like what I got interested in as a person. And I have since like turned a new leaf with regard to anime. I do buy all the merchandise now, so I like to make myself feel a little bit better about that, even though I was doing bad things. But I still remember the dial-up. I still remember downloading iCal, or Calendar as it's now called, over 2 days for like 40 megabytes or 20 megabytes or whatever it was. Downloading Safari, I gave up, and we did it at the Apple Store because it was faster. Like this was in macOS 10.2 days. So like I remember all of that distinctly. So to jump from less than 56k kilobits per second to just under 5 gigabits, that is something that I like truly feel, and I am it like marks a milestone in my life in a way, in terms of my overall interest and career, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's awesome. I just looked, and it's not available where I live, and that's fine. I still have gigabit fiber, and that's great. And I'm sort of glad, because I want like at least 10 gigabit equipment to come down in price before I splurge, because I like just bought Unify stuff, and I'm fine with gigabit. But hopefully when it gets to the point where there's like 5 or 10 gigabit near me, that equipment will also be cheap, because I mean the Unify stuff, I don't think I spent more than I did buy. I spent easily under $1,000, maybe like $800 on all of my stuff, and I'm sure you spent way more than that. So, yeah, I'm just like, I think I'll wait, and I'm okay with gigabit fiber until the price of the equipment also comes down. I mean, I would definitely pay more for the internet service alone, but I don't want to fork out thousands of dollars for all the equipment and replace my switches, and so.
Yeah,
it's a whole infrastructure change, and that's a lot. So.
Mm-hmm. And like the tech said, it's like unless you have something set up to take advantage of more than a single gigabit, you're not going to see any benefit.
Exactly.
Like your Wi-Fi won't even. Wi-Fi 6E barely tips over 1 gigabit when it does. And I have been able to, on 2 devices that I own, get more than a gigabit through a speed test out to the open internet, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
But for like the internal network of my home, having more than a gigabit has been super useful. So if you can start to kind of experiment with different types of switches, then I would say do it. Like get an old Mac Mini, have it connected to a RAID where you can go ahead and serve up a Time Machine backup for all your Macs. And all your Macs will just go ahead and back up to that one machine. And that is like so convenient. When you can make it fast, then it's even more convenient, right?
Yeah, I've got my server. It's running Linux, but it supports Time Machine backups, which is awesome. So I've got all my stuff running on that. But I had some issues with it, so I deleted my MacBook Air's Time Machine backup and started it fresh, and that was like 400 gigs, and it sat there for a couple days still trying to back everything up on a wireless gigabit connection. So there's definitely advantages to like preparing the network pre actual 5 or 10 gigabit internet, but it's expensive, so I'll wait.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. It's definitely coming down in price more and more lately. But it's still expensive. I will be the first to admit that I spent way too much money on what amounts to a hobby, like purely of interest. That said, this hobby is quickly materializing into something that I can take advantage of for my own business.
Yes, exactly.
So I can save $50 a month and instead spend way more to get 5 gigabit. But that is something that like I'm now prepared to do, which is really, really cool. And that's the part that I think I'm looking forward to the most. Like the next time I make an app, I no longer have to dread figuring out how to host a backend thing for it. I literally can just do that because it's available now.
You've got throughput for sure.
Mm-hmm. That said, talking about throughput, something very interesting that Spencer and I realized is although I have 5 gigabit to the internet and to certain servers like the Edge servers that Apple uses to distribute Xcode, obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean I have 5 gigabit to the World Wide Web, the entire Earth. Namely, Spencer, who is essentially an internet neighbor, like distances wise. He is not far from me from a fiber point of view, like an interconnect. Yeah. But I think your gigabit was limited to 170 megabit per second over to me. And that was surprising. Like, it wasn't something that we thought would happen when we were testing it. And that's something that you'd need to consider when you are kind of doing this sort of thing. Just because you have 5 gigabit does not mean that everyone has even a gigabit connecting to you. But that goes for anyone running a single server, right? Unless you are using a distributed whatchamacallit,
like Cloudflare.
Yeah, unless you're using one of those services to literally host your files around the world, doesn't mean people can connect to you even if they are halfway around the world. It's not only about latency, it's about throughput as well, which was kind of surprising. So just figured I'd share that.
Yeah, it was very interesting to get a fifth, or I guess let's even say like a fourth of, the actual sort of realistic speed that you get. Like we both did speed tests, and mine, I don't have it up, but it was like 900 and something upload and download. Like it was in the 900s. So yeah, it was quite a bit less than both of us were expecting.
Yeah, and one thing to kind of gauge this is if you ever use the speed test app, don't speed test to a local server, speed test to one that's far away. And that's going to really tell you what you're dealing with, because when you're accessing stuff on the internet, you are oftentimes accessing stuff that's close by when you're using Netflix and stuff like that. But if you're not accessing those particular services, chances are the server you're accessing can be quite far away. Like even if people are using AWS, they're not using AWS worldwide. They're using AWS and at US East or US West, which are particular data centers, which means that you need to connect to that data center. And generally, you probably have a good connection to those data centers because they're the main ones. But anything other than those data centers, and you may not have, like even within that data center, it depends who that provider is using for their internet access. They might not be using the one that's linked up to you, so therefore your connection is actually going halfway around the world to like make the full loop, just as a matter of how it's connected. So that is something to consider if you are going to run something out of your home, even though you do have a fast connection. That is one of the downsides of that. I imagine if I had gotten AT&T's dedicated internet, which costs a mortgage and a half every month, that I would have had a direct like connection to one of the main data centers here in Los Angeles. Like that's what I would have been paying for at the end of the day.
Hope so.
Which means that Spencer, once connecting to me, will have taken the fast route to get to me, rather than, hey, we're kind of taking a good route, but we're not going to take the most expedient one. Long story short, just because that's slow does not mean that you aren't benefiting from it. Like if everyone is connecting to you at 100 megabits individually, then that adds up, right? So there are tons of benefits, and most people don't need more than 100 megabits for anything anyways. Like to remind you, Netflix connects 4K video at less than 20. Like most of the time it's around 8 megabits. Like you really don't need fast internet for 4K video or anything. Like all that stuff about real-time streaming on 5G is a lie for the most part. So you just need a little bit for most things, but having a stable connection I think is worth tremendously more than that, and that's what I'm really happy about.
Yeah.
As always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on mastodon.social at code completion to know when new episodes go live, and feel free to toot at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis, for joining me this week. My name, once again, is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñol. That's DimitriBounil. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Do we want to talk briefly about how Friday is 3.5 days away?
Yep.
And
oh, baby.
it's almost here. Talk about things that have happened in the past 30 days of my life that have all kind of amounted.
Lots of exciting stuff.
So many exciting things. Definitely Tears of the Kingdom is not the thing I was waiting for the most. Actually, I think it was the one I was waiting for the longest. It has been sitting in my deliveries app for a hilariously long time. And it was also a joke that we shared often. Is like, oh, which one of these is going to have the most extended time? Is it going to be Breath of the Wild 2, or is it going to be Metroid 4? Which one of these are gonna outlive us? And it turns out Metroid Prime 4 is going to be the one that is going to continue sitting in my deliveries for, I think, 6 years. Definitely something ridiculous.
Brutal, dude.
The new delivery date is in 7 months, which coincides exactly with December 31st. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, weird.
Weird. But yeah, Tears of the Kingdom, right around the corner.
Heck yeah, dude. And it leaked and everything, and I've been avoiding anything, like any content related to it, like the plague. So I'm still going into it blind, which I'm excited about. We're almost there. We've done it. Yeah.
The way it leaked was kind of interesting. There's a site called Mercari, which I didn't know about up until now. It's kind of like an eBay. And apparently some physical copies got sold through there a little bit early. They probably got delivered to a GameStop, and then some employee at that GameStop was like, I'm going to sell these, and sold them. Some of the people that bought it, probably one individual, I imagine most don't have the facilities for this, but sure. One of the individuals that bought it immediately went and ripped the ROM off of it. Which is something that then got uploaded to the internet, and then either got played on OG Switches that have been jailbroken, or got played on emulators, and then massively got streamed all over YouTube and Twitch, and the impatience that was in me clicked on one of them. For 5 seconds, I saw 5 seconds of the opening thing, and I was like, no, I can't do this. I saw too much, because I know what the opening sequence is now, because I spoiled myself. So that's not too bad. That is something that I don't necessarily regret, but I was like, that is where I'm stopping. Because immediately you can connect so many dots based on what you saw in the trailers and all that. So I paused there, and I have instead used my superpowers of knowing that the fact that it leaked and what got leaked, to selectively pick the funniest things that got leaked and share those with Spencer.
Yes. Yeah.
One of them
things
was
that don't matter.
Things that don't matter at all. Like the fact that you can build things. We all know you can build things. Here's something that someone built. It is not age appropriate for anyone. But it got shared on the internet, and therefore I'm sharing it with Spencer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's about the only thing that I have spoiled my friends on, just because it was funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say don't play Tears of the Kingdom until it comes out, because it turns out there were patches for it that we're still not ready, because people work on the games until the very last minute, because why have a release date if you're not going to do that, right? So they had patches that improved stuff. Like, people might complain, hey, the game is slow, and then, oh, the patch fixes. Like, I don't know if that actually happened, or if anyone is substantiating that, but yeah.
Yeah, there's always like release day patches for games, so I'm not surprised about that.
It's very common. But yeah, 3.5 days away. I think Treehouse, which is Nintendo's like the marketing, Nintendo of America marketing division, they are going to do a stream that starts at 6 p.m. Pacific on Thursday. And they're basically going to stream until the release at midnight.
Cool.
Which means that it already released in Australia at that point, which is why they're probably starting at the 6 p.m. thing. So that is something that if you do want to get spoiled in a controlled way, where Nintendo's not going to like immediately tell you everything about the game, but let you get a peek while you're waiting for it to get delivered, that is something you can do. I heard other people speculate that, hey, since most of their major games are getting leaked now, something likely that's going to happen is like the physical release just ships later, right? The digital release comes first, and then
I can see that,
and then physical comes later. And I'm very saddened by that because I have a nearly 100% like physical collection of Switch games that I have not played. So
yeah,
so that is just something that like saddens me a little bit, but it makes sense from their point of view. That's an easy way to fix the problem of the game leaking early. At the very least, when it does leak, everyone already has it, and it's not like ruining people's experiences. So,
yeah. I saw that. I don't know if it's true. It was on Reddit, but someone said that like they had a photo of the game box and everything, and they said that Amazon accidentally shipped to them early. So
that's also possible. Amazon has done that.
Yeah.
So,
well, Dimitri
at least they're not ripping it, right? That's the part that like is gonna get people in big trouble. Is don't rip a game before it releases, like, and then stream it.
Yeah, I just saw that Nintendo issued a takedown for a Switch, jailbreaking tool from GitHub. Like they DMCA'd GitHub. So,
I don't know.
It's so vindictive.
I don't know if that's going to work, because the last time that happened, remember YouTube Download got hit by the music like industry?
Yeah.
That said, the music industry is a lot smaller than the gaming industry, which people don't seem to realize. So maybe it's not going to go that same way.
They'll just host it somewhere else. I don't really think it matters. I mean, Nintendo is just going to Nintendo and just be vindictive because they can, and they suck, but... That's what sucks, man. They're getting my money anyway, and I hate that. But it's like, it's not gonna, they have my childhood in an iron grip, man. So, yeah.
And they know it.
I know. So, Dimitri said, we'll see you all next week. I don't know about that. We both have work off. I took a week off just to play this game, so we'll see. I'm just kidding.
I took a child just to be able to play this game. I'm just kidding.
Planned it exactly perfectly. He knew.
The irony is once I knew of the Breath of the Tears of the Kingdom release date, I immediately put in like a 2-week vacation. But then like maybe a week later, we got confirmation that like we're gonna have a kid, and that's when they're gonna be born. Nice. So I was like, well, that planned out fine.
Yep.
So it's definitely gonna be a year to remember, 2023. Lots of big milestones, some significantly bigger than others. Like Tears of the Kingdom is definitely number one. I'm just kidding.
Oh man,
no, I'm definitely like number one in my heart is the child that I am going to spend the rest of my life teaching and sharing everything I know with. Like that is absolutely number one in my heart, in case there was any doubt to anyone listening. But like distant number two, I cannot decide if it's Tears of the Kingdom or Fiber Internet. It's definitely one of those two.
Both of those like hit you in the childhood, man.
so much. Like it's just a vivid memory, right? In either case, whether it was like watching someone else beat Ocarina of Time for me because I was too dumb to play it,
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
or like being painfully aware of how slow internet is. And at one point, I like paid for business internet, thinking it would be fast. Oh, it was not good. It was not good at all. I paid for business cable. That was a hard lesson to learn because it came with a 2-year contract I had to pay for. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a tough lesson, but it's a lesson learned, right?
Indeed.
Now I can get static IPs without the public.
That's awesome.
Anyways, bye everyone.
Bye.